A monstrous wave of lead hurtled through the mist. Screams erupted from the line as it hit. With a horrible crack, certain death deflected from the battered crest of Garrett's helm. Rusted shot tore through poor Victor, opening his chest and spilling his bowels. He went down with a splash, disappearing into the bog, his innards torn at by searching roots, pulling him down in the mud. Bellowed their captain. Forward! A riot of musket fire erupted in response. The sons of the Mandrake closed the gap. Their inquisitor pulled the disgusting shackled hulk under with his eel hook. His brethren beat the enemy back with moldy cudgels. In the midst of the whirling commotion, Garrett chewed and gulped down the undulating mandrake he had saved since the start of the pilgrimage. He suppressed the urge to vomit as excruciating power surged through his body. 3 enemy soldiers waved hastily towards him. Garrett thrashed violently, hurling screamed curses at their searching pikes before severing their limbs. For a moment the battle waned and the soiling fog peeled away. Garrett stood alone in silence. He could see the remains of his comrades among the root-laden corpses of foul heretics scattered about the marsh. Unhooking a hatchet from his belt, he set about his grim work and settled in for lunch. Churned mud and swampland stretches out in the gloom. Thick fog hangs heavy in the air. Rolling barrows loom out of the murk. A strange root rides underfoot. 1,000 years after the defeat of Napoleon at the Battle of Austerlitz, the world has fallen into decay. Endless war has led to technology stagnating, and beautiful countrysides have been ground to a thick ruin under the boots of 1,000,000 dead men. Now, nothing grows. A bizarre and horrible root covers the land, strangling the life from the trees, poisoning the water, and filling the sky with an acrid mist. Humanity barely endures by harvesting this disgusting tuber. It twists their bodies and minds and infests their thoughts with divine visions of lost vegetables. Bizarre religious orders have formed. They stockpile abandoned weapons unearthed by the twisting roots, marching in column under fluttering banners and brandishing mud-clogged muskets and rusted bayonets. They are cruel parodies of long-forgotten armies on the march. Gather your troops, fix bayonets, and devote yourself to the roots. Ancient burial mounds litter the landscape. Scattered huts peek out from the mud. Decayed trees creak in the breeze. Flocks of swelling swarm overhead as the puckered ooze of the swamp drowns another helpless fool. Cyst is a landlocked county situated somewhere in what remains of Central Europe. Incidentally muddy, miserable, and home to all manners of foul creatures lurking in the mist, it is far from being a nice place. The inhabitants are equally as foul, a squabbling collection of ragged peasants, scavengers, and murderers. The apocalypse has not been kind to Cyst and its people, who in general are a sour lot. They have managed to claw back enough technology to exist in a somewhat medieval state, living as they do in cobbled together fortifications and the remains of slowly sinking slums. If a visitor were to climb up treacherous steps and look out from the highest towers of Gitz, the capital of Cyst, they would gaze through thick fog out onto a wheezing marshland pimpled with villages. A keen-eyed tourist might spot one of the many hunched parties of puddled farmers or stilt hut scavengers. The clanging bells and bellicose grumbling of these denizens carries along ancient and hidden paths through the swamp, while the patter of rain on rusted iron and the cry of disturbed marsh animals mark out further mysterious movements lost to the gloom. The county of Cyst is an intensely schismatic place, and this is reflected in its people. Every person, building, and animal belongs to some form of unique cult or holy order dedicated to a root vegetable. Cystish folk, as is their correct denominatum, insist on proudly costuming themselves in ancient uniforms and fashions. They will, in every sense, resort to decorating their possessions and as many root-themed icons, relics, pendants, banners, and tokens as possible. A persistent unpleasantness, the roots have been part of life for as long as anyone in Cyst can remember. What little history can be gleaned from decaying papers suggests that the roots infested the world with their enormous tendrils sometime after the cataclysmic Black Powder conflict. Running rampant and thriving in a countryside destroyed by war, the serpentine network of fibrous tentacles has sucked the life from the ground, poisoned the seas, and fouled the air. In return for its laborious parasitism, it has sprouted many strange and miraculous vegetables which in turn feed the inhabitants of Cyst. These roots have mutating, mind-warping effects so that the people and animals of Cyst and the large world have changed in many odd ways. Dining on the roots also provides strange dreams that encourage the people, sometimes the animals, to spend their miserable lives worshipping and caring for this parasitic leviathan. The afflicted completely devote their lives to tending and harvesting the mutating gifts. These tubers, although appearing as slightly more repellent versions of our own root vegetables, are more often than not filled with semi-formed organs, cartilage, and bones, and are some way to becoming uncomfortably alive. Tasting repugnant, containing bloated masses of boils, hairs, and carbohydrates, they are deeply adored by cityish folk despite their mutating effects. It's quite common for inhabitants, who after some years have begun to look more root-like than human, to be found gossiping in Brichrian pubs about their latest slums, or fondly reminiscing about a particularly violent spate of the rooty growths. Von Sneg salivated under his visor as he leant in to sniff the relic. Carefully he unclasped the gilded case and prized open the jeweled locket of bone that lay inside. Warning to the obstinate by Victor August. While one is likely to find the locals complaining about their betters in the pubs of Bihir, there are also quite a range of settlements spattering the swamps of Cyst. Geats is the biggest, having its own walls, cobbled streets, and labyrinthine bridges. Agos Castle is a cramped and crumbling bastille, forever sinking into and rising out of the mud. Gerpi has its walking stilt huts, Krotz its mine, Sleek its forges, and Shellwood its mucus. The other settlements have been strangely silent this year, though it's imagined they are just preparing for the upcoming festivities. Outside the county are root-ridden barrows, piles of bodies heaped in the aftermath of generations of regimental squabbling, overgrown with moss and clothed in an impenetrable fog. In the gloom roam enormous root-borne horrors, worshipped as minor deities by the hill folk of Cyst. Recently, they have been spotted more and more by scavenging parties, the monstrosities looping around the foothills and moaning to themselves in their ancient tongue. There exists only one complete map of Cyst locked away in the lump pits of Gesselwerp. With the assistance of Todd, we have managed to smuggle a copy to help you on your way. What the fuck am I reading? Todd was once a dashing cavalry officer who, after a heavy night carousing, decided to link an amphibian radish for a bet. He became increasingly toad-shaped over the course of a week, and now, as a lumpy toad mutant, acts as a sword for hire for those regiments yet ignorant of his illustrious career. The squelching county of Cyst attracts roaming bands of root-obsessed zealots, calling themselves regiments. They flock to the county for the local root festivals, searching for rare roots with divine powers. The countryside became overrun with these homicidal pilgrims and famished root fiends. The officer's eye swam in delirious desire. Within the locket lay a tiny, shriveled, potato-like vegetable. Oh, it was glorious. A root perfect in its shape, its size, its scent. He had never seen anything like it. At the back of his mind, the root reminded von Sneg of his father. Uncaring, he reached towards the minuscule object, which was berating him about his long hair, and popped it in his mouth. The root tasted so fine as he massaged it around his gums, savoring the piquance with its tongue. Suddenly, without warning, his head imploded. In a shower of flesh, the remains of von Sneg's neck and spine sucked violently upwards, coiling in mid-air. What was left of his features coalesced into a mass of wiggling toes and roots. His followers cheered as they clapped him on the back, then hurled his twitching body in the back of the cart. "Good old Sneg," they murmured in the ranks. Further warnings to the obstinate by Victor August the Younger. The door crashed inwards as several large men carrying cudgels and wearing evil grins entered the hovel. The elderly couple grimaced as the brutish soldiers helped themselves to their valuables. Through the remains of the doorframe, the couple peered outside into the evening light. A horde of shuffling men and women marched through the village square, their formation resembling something less like an army and more like a millipede with a limp. Hunched and crooked, they stumbled forward in a grumbling mass to the chanting of hedge priests and the barking of snobs. Visors locked by rust, bayonets bristling, mossy tufts sprouting from filth-caked bodies. They were the regiments. A regiment is always led by a character known to their followers as the Toff. Individual exhibiting odd mutations and outstanding personalities, Toffs represent the fanatical holy men, inspiring commanders and auspicious prophets that aim to gain a reputation in the swamps. Following the Toff like leeches are a collection of squabbling toadies. These are sniveling sub-commanders that fawn over their self-important Toff on their crusade. Supporting this cast of aristocratic characters collectively known as snobs are their followers, which can be categorized into three general groups: brutes, fodder, and chaff. Brutes are the fighting elite, especially dedicated to the cause and completely addicted to the strange powers of the roots. Brutes are relatively well fed and often heavily armored. Fodder form the core of most regiments. These followers are the masses willing to lay down their lives for their odd causes. Malnourished saps fodder are gathered together in tight order and pushed onwards by pounding drums and inspiring banners. Chaffs represent the lighter skirmishing troops. They are remarkably terrible shots, but the chaff's ability to distract and confuse opponents proves invaluable in the heat of battle. Of course, these are not the only types of members a regiment can have. A regiment can also include cavalry, artillery, and character and many other different characters, one of them being a loaf of bread on legs called ergot. But this is all the time we have for now. If you managed to reach this far, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.